Okay. You ever heard of a place like actually changing its name to honor a person?
Mm.
It's not something you see every day, right?
Right.
But that's what happened with Sun Yat-sen, the father of modern China, his birthplace.
Yeah.
Originally Qing,
Okay.
became Zongshan. Makes you think, huh,
Yeah.
what kind of legacy makes people do that? That level of respect. That's what we're diving into today. We've got these excerpts from his Wikipedia page, and
Okay.
let me tell you, this is not your average history lesson.
It's true, that name change,
Mm-hmm.
super significant. It happened in 1925, right after Sun Yat-sen died.
Mm-hmm.
Really shows his impact. China's had, like tons of political shifts, but
Right.
Sun Yat-sen, still a unifying figure. Mainland China, Taiwan,
Mhm.
totally different systems, but
I know,
they
right?
both revere this guy. That tells you something.
Talk about a unifying figure. Okay, so Sun Yat-sen, he wasn't born into, like, privilege or anything.
Mm-hmm.
Grew up in a village. His dad was a tailor, a porter. Not exactly the typical revolutionary background. So where'd the seeds of change come from?
His older brother, Sun Mei, key player.
Yeah.
He was doing well for himself in Hawaii. Big-time rancher. Believed in Sun Yat-sen, financed his education, sent him to Iolani School in Honolulu.
That's where he first encounters Christianity, right? And get this, his brother tried to stop him from converting.
Wow.
Talk about conviction. At that age.
It shows how strong-willed Sun Yat-sen was, even as a teenager. And it wasn't just a conversion, like a simple one. He saw connections. Christianity, his own revolutionary ideas. He even called revolution a salvation mission. This wasn't just religion. It was about saving China.
Wow. Western religion sparking change in China.
Ah.
Okay, so then he goes on to study medicine in Hong Kong. You'd think future doctor, right?
Yeah.
Maybe not so into radical ideas.
Not Sun Yat-sen. This was a crazy time in China. The Qing Dynasty falling apart. Everyone could feel change coming. And while he's at the Hong Kong College of Medicine for Chinese, gets involved with this group. They call themselves the Four Bandits.
Four bandits? Are you serious? That's amazing. They were like the original revolutionaries with like a sense of humor or something. They start the Revived China Society, which, come on, that name's not subtle.
Yep.
But then they also have this front, the Kunheng Club. It's like something out of a movie.
Brilliant tactic, though. They knew strategy mattered. To break a system, sometimes you got to work from inside. Shows they were idealistic, but also pragmatic.
They weren't messing around. And talk about bold moves. Sun Yat-sen, he petitions the Qing government directly, wants reform, which, knowing how things turn out,
Yeah.
pretty big miscalculation on their part, huh?
Total system failure to adapt. Ignoring Sun Yat-sen's petition. Basically said, peaceful reform, not an option.
Yeah.
That just made him more determined to revolt.
Wow, talk about adding fuel to the fire, getting dismissed like that by the very system you're trying to change. I can see why he went all in on revolution. But before we get to all that, let's talk about his exile in Japan.
That's a crucial period for him. Exile in Japan. That's where his three principles of the people solidify. Nationalism, democracy, and welfare. They became the core of his vision for a new China.
And those principles, I mean, they're not just like old history now, right?
Not at all. They're still a huge deal in China today. Even now, with all the complexities of Chinese politics, people are still debating and reinterpreting them.
Okay, so he's in exile, coming up with these groundbreaking principles, but revolutions, they need more than ideas, right? They need support. And this is where things get really interesting. Where do you think Sun Yat-sen found the resources to make a revolution happen?
Might surprise you,
Mm-hmm.
but it was overseas Chinese communities, not just wealthy donors, though those existed too. It was communities in Southeast Asia, places like Singapore, Malaysia. They wanted to see a new China.
That's amazing. The global reach of this movement. It wasn't just happening inside China. It was about the diaspora, a shared desire for change.
Exactly. These communities, vital. They were Sun Yat-sen's funding, his manpower. Not just passive either. They spread his message, built support for the cause. Remember the Tongming Way? The United League.
It's a group he forms to really push for revolution.
That's the one. And their headquarters, based in
Right.
Singapore for a time, shows how important these overseas networks were. Safe havens, bases of operation, and a way to connect with a global community that shared his vision.
So we've got Sun Yat-sen. He's building this network, strategizing, and meanwhile, back in China, things are getting intense. Uprisings, the Qing Dynasty barely holding on. Then it's 1911, the Wuchang Uprising starts, the one that really kicks off the revolution. Where's Sun Yat-sen during all this?
Denver, Colorado.
Denver. Seriously. You're kidding?
Right.
Can you imagine devoting your life to a revolution, being, what, thousands of miles away? And suddenly it's happening.
Wild, right?
Revolutions, man. Full of surprises. And sometimes the guy leading the charge isn't even there when it all goes down.
It's funny, isn't it? The leader of a revolution, not, leading troops, but raising money, getting support. It shows you revolution's not just speeches and fighting. It's planning, alliances, even fundraising.
The stuff behind the scenes that nobody really thinks about, but it's crucial. But hey, speaking of surprises, here's a big one. Sun Yat-sen gets back to China after the uprising, and guess what? He's elected provisional president. Brand new Republic of China. Talk about a win, right? Years of struggle finally pays off.
Yeah, but things are rarely that simple, especially not when you're talking about a whole country changing. Sun Yat-sen, he was a visionary, sure, but he's also practical. He knew starting a new government wouldn't be easy, not with guys like Yuan Shikai still around.
Yuan Shikai, remind me who he was again?
Powerful general. Controlled the Beiyang army, one of the strongest military forces in China at the time. So Qing Dynasty is falling apart. Yuan Shikai sees an opportunity. He's negotiating with everyone. The revolutionaries, the king court makes himself look like the key to a smooth transition.
Playing both sides. Never a good look.
Rarely ends well, and
Great.
this was no exception. But for a minute, looked like peace was possible. Yuan Shikai, he promised Sun Yat-sen he'd get the emperor to step down, support a republic.
Which is why Sun Yat-sen steps aside,
Right.
gives up the presidency to Yuan Shikai.
Exactly. Big risk, but calculated. He chose unity, stability over his own ambition. He thought Yuan Shikai, with his army, could actually unify China, prevent more bloodshed.
Noble goal. But we all know where this is going, right? It's like one of those history lessons. You already know the ending is going to be rough.
Yeah, not exactly a happy ending. Yuan Shikai had his own plans. Sharing power, not interested. Democracy, forget about it. Soon as he takes office, he starts consolidating his grip.
So much for a peaceful transition. What'd Sun Yat-sen do?
Tried to fight back, obviously. But when Yuan Shikai disbands the National Assembly, where Sun Yat-sen's party, the Kuomintang, they had the majority, that was a clear sign. Then the assassination of Song Jiaoren.
KMT leader, right.
Right, that really escalated things.
And I'm betting no one believed that was a coincidence.
You got it. That assassination sent shockwaves through the entire revolutionary movement. Yuan Shikai was making it clear. He'd do anything to eliminate his opponents.
So what did Sun Yat-sen do?
He launched what they called the Second Revolution, trying to take down Yuan Shikai. But it was a long shot, and it failed. Yuan Shikai was too strong. Sun Yat-sen had to escape back into exile, back to Japan.
Exile, revolution, exile. It's like his life was just this constant back and forth, fighting for his beliefs, running for his life. But he never actually gave up, did he? Even after being exiled again.
Nope. He used the time to regroup, reorganize the KMT, figure out his next move. Meanwhile, Yuan Shikai makes his next move, declares himself emperor in 1915.
Emperor, seriously, you think after all those centuries of dynasties, China would be ready for something different?
Right. But change is rarely neat and tidy, especially not in a country as massive and complex as China. And Yuan Shikai's ambition, well, it was his downfall, that whole emperor thing. Didn't go over well. People opposed him, and he had to step down pretty quickly.
Another wannabe emperor bites the dust. But that didn't exactly solve the problem, did it?
Not even close. Yuan Shikai dies, and suddenly there's this power vacuum. China's plunged into chaos, the warlord era. Countries divided, warlords fighting each other, each with their own armies, their own ambitions.
And what's Sun Yat-sen up to in all this?
He's still fighting for a unified, democratic China, a symbol of hope. But even he had a tough time navigating the warlord era.
It must felt like all those years of fighting, all for nothing. China's more divided than ever. What do you even do when you're up against those odds?
Sun Yat-sen, he made a decision, one that would change everything for China. In 1923, he teams up with someone you might not expect, the Chinese Communist Party.
The Communists. Now that's a twist. I thought Sun Yat-sen was all about democracy and nationalism. How'd that happen? What did they have in common?
It was strategic, for sure, born out of necessity. Sun Yat-sen, he saw that the communists, they were organized, disciplined, they had growing support from the peasants. He needed that to reach his goals.
And what about the communists? Why team up with him?
Opportunity. Remember, back then, the CCP, they were small, new. By working with Sun Yat-sen, the KMT, they got resources, legitimacy, a national platform.
Yeah, win-win.
Not so simple. Both sides, yeah, they wanted to unify China and the warlord era, but their vision for the future, completely different. Sun Yat-sen, he still believed in democracy, multiple parties. The CCP, they'd seen the Bolsheviks in Russia. They wanted a one-party socialist state.
Sounds like trouble waiting to happen.
Yeah, you could say that. This alliance, the First United Front, It was shaky from the start, but it did lead to some big changes.
Like what?
Well, with help from the Soviets, Sun Yat-sen creates the Whampoa Military Academy, hugely important in Chinese history.
Whampoa Military Academy. Why does that sound so familiar?
Think about it. This academy, rigorous, discipline, ideology, and it produced some of the most important military leaders in 20th century China. Nationalists,
Oh,
communists.
hold on, you're not saying. The very school Sun Yat-sen creates to unify China ends up training the people who would later tear it apart.
It's a pretty tragic irony, isn't it? But let's not get ahead of ourselves here. Don't forget this alliance with the CCP. It also had a big impact on Sun Yat-sen's own thinking.
Oh, yeah. How so?
He never gave up on democracy, but he started talking more about political tutelage. The KMT would guide the country, a kind of transition period, before China was ready for real democracy.
So he's seeing the appeal of a stronger, more centralized approach, maybe even authoritarian.
It's something historians still debate. But his thinking was definitely changing. The chaos of the warlord era, the difficulty of unifying the country, and of course the CCP's influence. All of it shaped his views. Remember that quote from his speech at Hong Kong University. He said, "The corruption of China, the peace, order, and good government of Hong Kong had turned me into a revolutionary." That says a lot about how his experiences continued to shape his beliefs.
It's really something how his views on revolution changed over time. It wasn't just about overthrowing the bad guys. It was about a better future for China, even if it was complicated.
And remember, the CCP alliance, double-edged sword. It might have led to unity, but it also brought in a whole new force into Chinese politics, one that would eventually challenge everything Sun Yat-sen had worked for.
Talk about foreshadowing. Sounds like we're headed towards a major showdown, a clash of ideologies. And it all started with Sun Yat-sen, the guy who dedicated his life to revolution. Wild.
It just goes to show you history is unpredictable. Even the best intentions can have unintended consequences. And sometimes those consequences are tragic.
Makes you wonder what Sun Yat-sen would have thought of it all. Would he be happy with how China turned out? Or heartbroken by the divisions? Tough questions.
Yeah, no easy answers there. But that's what's so interesting about history, right? It's not just dates and names. It's trying to understand why people did what they did, how they shaped the world, and what they left behind. And with Sun Yat-sen, those questions, they're still being debated today.
It's kind of poetic when you think about it. Sun Yat-sen helps set the stage for, well, everything that shapes modern China, even if it wasn't exactly what he'd pictured. But he doesn't get to see it all happen.
He doesn't. 1925, he's in Beijing seeking treatment. They thought it was liver cancer at first, turned out to be gallbladder cancer.
Oh, wow.
He dies there, only 58 years old.
That's so young, especially after everything he did, everything he went through. Makes you wonder what else he could have done, what China would be like if he'd lived longer.
It does. It's one of those big what-if questions that history just leaves us with. But what's amazing is how much his legacy mattered even after he was gone.
And not always in a simple way, right? I mean, we're talking about a guy who's revered in mainland China and Taiwan. Two completely different systems. How does that even work?
It shows you the power of symbols, how history gets used, how it gets like rewritten to fit different agendas. Take mainland China, the Communist Party. Once they're in power, they say Sun Yat-sen, he was a forerunner to their revolution. They connect his three principles to their own ideology, basically making him like a precursor to Mao Zedong.
So they kind of took his legacy and made it their own.
Pretty much. They knew his image was powerful, the unifier, and they used that.
And what about Taiwan? How do they reconcile Sun Yat-sen with, well, with everything about them?
In Taiwan, he's the father of the Republic of China, their founding father. They focus on his belief in democracy, multiple parties, his role in ending the Qing Dynasty.
It's just wild, isn't it? The same guy used to justify two completely opposite systems, two versions of China. Just shows you history's not just facts, it's how we interpret them.
Exactly. And Sun Yat-sen, he's a perfect example. Complex guy, full of contradictions, influenced by the West, but also deeply Chinese. Wanted democracy, but also knew that sometimes you need strong leadership, especially when things are chaotic.
Makes me think of that quote, the one about the corruption of China and the order of Hong Kong turning him into a revolutionary. It's like he saw the good and the bad in everything, always trying to find what would work for China.
Exactly. He was a man of his time, saw the Qing Dynasty crumble, Western powers coming in, China searching for its way, and he spent his life trying to make sense of it all.
His story, it's still important today, not just in China. Nationalism, democracy, social welfare. His ideas, we're still talking about them, still fighting about them.
He reminds us, progress. It's rarely easy. It's messy. You have to adapt. You have to challenge the way things are.
So, as you learn more about Sun Yat-sen, think about this. Can any country truly escape its past? Are we always connected to the choices, the paths, the legacies of those who came before us? Makes you think, right? This whole deep dive, it wasn't just about one man. It's about the things that shape entire nations, the power of ideas, even when everything else is falling apart.